Okay, imagine this. What if you could turn your next lesson, whether it's history, science, literature, you name it, into an unforgettable adventure? I'm talking about an immersive game where your students don't just memorize facts, but they actually live them, solving puzzles to unlock a much deeper understanding. Well, today we're diving into the exact blueprint for how to create one, the educational escape room. So let's kick things off with a really cool example called educational evolution. Just picture it. Your students are no longer just students. Nope, they're now time-traveling learning mediators. And their mission? They have to jump across 3 completely different eras to save the future of learning. They'll go from a classroom in 2050 that's full of tech but totally disengaged, all the way back to a low-tech classroom in 1890, and then leap forward to a future in 2150 where an AI system is on the verge of total collapse. I know, it sounds awesome, right? But let's be real, it also sounds incredibly complicated. So how do you get from this cool idea of time-traveling heroes to a game that actually works, is educational, and is fun for a whole classroom? How do you make sure the learning part doesn't get lost in all the excitement? Well, the secret is having a map. And what you're looking at right here, this is the entire journey laid out. It's a 6-phase checklist, a systematic blueprint that makes sure you perfectly balance your educational goals with a compelling story and, of course, super engaging gameplay. So let's walk through it phase by phase. All right, these first 3 phases are all about building the foundation of your game. This is really the creative heart of the whole process. It's where you'll come up with the story, figure out the structure, and design the challenges that are going to drive the whole experience. So phase 1 is where it all begins. And right here, you're wearing 2 hats at the same time. You've got your curriculum designer hat on, defining those specific learning goals, but then you've got your storyteller hat on, creating the narrative universe that's going to make those goals come alive. The key is that these two have to be woven together right from the start. So how do you actually pull this off? Well, first, you lock in your core learning objectives. What is the absolute must-know stuff you need students to walk away with? Second, you wrap those objectives in a great story, and a classic 3-act structure is perfect for this. It gives you a clear beginning, middle, and end. And third, and this is so important, you have to build in moments for them to make collaborative decisions that actually affect the outcome. Let's circle back to our educational evolution example, because it's a perfect case study for this. It follows that 3-act structure to a T. Act 1, it introduces the mission and the problem they have to solve back in 2050. Act 2 sends the players back to 1890 to find a solution. That's the central conflict. And Act 3, it brings it all to a head with a big plot twist and a final crisis in 2150. See how that structure provides a narrative backbone for the whole game? Okay, let's move on to phase 2. So once you have your story, you've got to decide how players are actually going to move through it. This phase is all about the mechanics of the journey. We're talking about the game's structure and its flow. And you've generally got 3 models to choose from. A linear structure is pretty straightforward. It's like a straight path where players solve puzzles one after another in a specific order. Open-ended is more like a sandbox. It lets them tackle a bunch of challenges at once, which is awesome for teamwork and delegation. And then there's multilinear, which is kind of like a choose-your-own-adventure book, with branching paths where their choices lead to different puzzles and outcomes. And this right here is what makes that structure tangible. It's a game flow diagram. Now, I know it might look a little complex, but it's basically a roadmap for your players. It charts out every single puzzle, every decision point, and every story beat from the very beginning to the final escape. Visualizing the flow like this is so important because it helps you spot any dead ends or confusing paths before your students ever do. With our story and structure locked in, we have arrived at phase 3, developing the actual puzzles and challenges. This is where you design the specific tasks students will have to complete to move the story forward and hit those learning goals we talked about. And the most important thing to remember here is variety. A great escape room isn't just a bunch of combination locks. You really want a mix of challenges to appeal to everybody's different strengths. So think about logic puzzles that test critical thinking, maybe some hands-on activities where students have to physically build something. You could have search-based tasks where they're hunting for clues in a text or around the room, and definitely include some decision-making scenarios where there isn't one right answer that forces a real debate. All right, so the core of our game is designed on paper. We've got a story, a flow, and puzzles. Now for the really fun part, bringing it all to life. Welcome to phase 4, where we get to build the world our players are going to step into.
This is where your classroom totally transforms. You get to be a world builder, creating this immersive setting that just pulls students into the story from the second they walk in. This could be anything: aged maps and cryptic letters for a history theme, or maybe mock lab equipment and blinking LEDs for a science mystery. You can use tablets for interactive digital puzzles, or even just simple QR codes that lead to hidden videos. The whole goal is to set the stage and make the world feel so real that students kind of forget they're even in a classroom. So your game is designed, your world is built, but you are not done. In fact, these next two phases might just be the most important ones for making sure your escape room is actually educational. It's time to test, run, and reflect. Phase 5 is all about playtesting and iteration, and I really can't stress this enough. You have got to test your game before you run it with your class. This is where you find out which puzzles are secretly impossible, which clues are way too obscure, and where your game flow completely breaks down. It's your one chance to fix all those problems before they can derail the whole experience. And there's a clear method for this. First, run a preliminary playtest with a small group, maybe some colleagues or a few students, and ask them to use a think aloud protocol. That just means they narrate their thought process as they play. It gives you priceless insights. Then, second, you have to check if the learning is actually sticking. Use anonymous surveys or focus groups after the test to see if students really got the educational content, not just the fun parts. And that brings us, finally, to Phase 6, execution and after-game analysis. This is game day. This is when you get to introduce the escape room, facilitate the whole thing, watch how they interact, and maybe provide a few hints when needed to keep the momentum going. But listen, the game itself is only half of the experience. The most critical part of this entire process isn't that moment of escape. It's the reflection that happens afterward. That after-game debriefing is where the real, lasting learning gets locked in. Because when you think about it, the goal isn't just to escape a room. The real escape is from passive learning. It's about unlocking a more engaged, more collaborative, and way more memorable way of understanding tough subjects. That debriefing session is where students connect all the dots between the game they just played and the curriculum. It reinforces the learning objectives because they have to talk about what they discovered. It helps them analyze their own problem-solving strategies. What worked, what didn't. It strengthens their communication and teamwork skills. And most importantly, it cements the entire experience in their memory, turning just another lesson into a real achievement. So there you have it. This 6-phase blueprint gives you a systematic path to transform pretty much any subject into a real adventure. By weaving together a great story, clever gameplay, and clear educational goals, you can create a learning experience that's truly powerful. The framework is all here. The only question left is, what adventure will your classroom unlock?